Hi and welcome to part 9 of this video series. Today we're going to make it possible to add notes to a client and also edit them and show them. And after that we're going to make it possible to change information about the users. So this way you can add the first name and last name to the users. First we're going to start by adding notes to clients. There we need a model. And I want this to be appear in Django, of course, and in the client and models.py. And then here we can just say class note models.model. And here I want the team field, so I can just copy it from up here. Rename this to notes. And I also want a reference to the client, since the team can have multiple clients. So client equals models.foreign-key client. Related name is notes, and on delete equals models.cascade. And then I want the name for note. I can just copy it from here. And a body, which is a models.text field. I can set this to blank equals true and null equals true in case you just want to add the name of a note in the first. Great, so that's the model. So we can go to the command line and update the database. Python manage.py, make migrations, and Python manage.py, migrate. Great, so now we have the database model for storing notes in the database, and that's the first task done. And then we can go to the serializer. I still want to be in the client here. First we can import note up here. And then below here, class note serializer, serializer.model, serializer, class meta, and the model is, of course, note. And the fields I want should be ID, and I want the name, and I want the body. I don't think that I need it team or client, so I just leave it for now. So there we can set this task to done, and we can continue to create a view set for this. So in views.py we first import the note model, and then we import the note serializer. And then at the end here we can create a class note view set, viewsets.model viewset, because we want all of the functionality like create, edit, view and delete. And then the serializer class is the note serializer we just created. The query set is note.objects.all, and I think I can just copy these. Okay, first I can copy the get create query set there, because I want to filter them by team, but I also want to filter them by the company, no, the client ID. And to get the client ID, I just want to use the request.get parameter client ID, so I can pass this in the URL. And .filter client ID equals client ID. And it's okay to say client underscore ID, because that's basically what this actually says. This is a reference to the client ID, but Django fixes all of the other things for us. Great, so now we can get these based on the client and the team. Perfect. So then we need to copy the perform create. Oops. There. Okay, so we use the team and the created by. I didn't add the created by to the database, but we should actually have that. So I can copy this. And okay, we can also have the created at, so we just know when it was created and also the modified. And then replace this with notes. Now we need to update the database again. First make migrations. Okay, I need to add a default value to this. I can just add timezone.now. And I also need a default value for this. And here I also want to pass in 1, which is the ID for one of the users. Great. So then I can migrate and run the server. So then I can go back here again. So now this will be filled out. Perfect. And also modified and created. That will happen automatically. Okay, and here to get the client ID, I want to get this the same way as here. Now we can actually send this as a post data. So client ID equals request dot data client ID. And then we set client ID equals client ID like this. I hope this should work. So that's it for now. We can go back here, set this to done. Now we just need to import the things we created to the URLs page. So inside client urls.py, here we include router.register notes, note view set, and the base name is notes. And also need to import this here and save. So now most of the things in the backend is finished, and we can go and create a page for adding notes. So in the dashboard, create a new file, add note.view, and I can make a copy of one of these since we will have a few of these fields. So just copy the content of add client and paste it here. Add note. And we want the name, but we don't want the contact person, but we can rename this to body. And instead of an input field here, we want a text area. And it can have that vModel, but I want a class of text area. And then just close the text area. And the rest of these fields can just be removed. So now we only have the name, body, and a submit button. Great. Now we can rename the add client to add note. And instead of saying all of this, we just want the body, which is default empty. Create a new object here, note. We want the name, but we don't want this for here. So then we can remove this. And here we want to pass in the client ID we are on. So client ID, this dot route dot params dot ID, because we are going to be on a specific client ID when we add this. So this client ID is the one we get here in a request.data, and we pass in there. Great. So then we can rename this to notes and pass in the note object. And the note was added. And here I want to redirect you back to the client page. So name, client, and params ID, client.id, which is not existing, but we can replace it with this route params.id, like that. And then everything there should be okay. So we can save this. Then we need to import it to the router. Just make a copy of one of these. Add note. And then we need to find the client detail page. There. Make a copy of this, or we can make a copy of the edit actually. Add note, or add dash note. Add note and save. And then the last thing we need to do to test this is to go to client.vue, and then we need to add a button here. So first we can add an HR just to separate this a little bit. Div class column is 12. H2 class subtitle notes. And then a router link column 2. And then I can make a copy of this. Add note, and the ID is client.id because that we have access to here. Add note, close the router link and close the div and save. Great, so now just notice that there are no errors. Perfect. So now we can go to the browser to test this. If we go into client 1 here, now we have the notes here and we have an add notes button or link. So just click that. I just want to open this so I see if there are any errors. Yes, contact person. Where is that? This of course should be body. Save, refresh, and the error is gone. Note 1, the body. Submit. Okay, got the 500 error. Request is not defined. Okay. I think that is okay, because there should probably just be self.request and self.request. Save. I can try again. Submit. And now the note was added. Perfect. And no errors in the backend. So now there should be a note we can show here. Perfect. So that means we can go to the to-do list and set this task to done, and we have also sent the information to the server. So now I want to make it possible to show the notes on the detail page of a client. So we can go back to client.vue, and here I want to have an array notes, like this should just be empty. And after this.get client, I can say this.get notes, or I can just actually do it in here. So yes, remove this, and I can create a new Axios in here. Await Axios, and then I want to copy this notes and just add question mark client ID equals, like that, remove the last slash there. So this client ID here will be the one we get here in the request.get parameter. Perfect. And then we get the response, so then response. This.notes equals response.data. And if we get any errors, we just show them in the console. Great, so save now, refresh, no errors but no notes, so we need to add them up here below the router link. Div class box v4 note in notes vbind key, so it's unique, note.id, and then h3 class is size 4, and we want to show note.name there, and p note.body, and close the div. So now we have note here, but the body is missing. Note.body, but why is it missing? We have it here in the serializer. And the model, it's named body. Yes, it's because this says this.contact person body. I didn't see that, I didn't replace this, so it should be this.body. So now it should work by creating new notes. We can create one more. Note 2, the body of note 2. Submit. And now it's shown there. Perfect. Okay, I just want to convert this add note to a button. So class button is success. Great, and then MB6, so we get a little bit space below it. Perfect. So now we have the possibility to add and show the notes. Then we just need to make it possible to edit notes as well.
Before I continue, I just want to say thanks to my Patreons. If you too want to support me, you will find a link to my Patreon in the description below.
So the first thing we need then is a new page. Edit notes.vue. And I can copy the add note because much of this will be very similar. Edit note, the name, the body, and this can just be like this, or we can update this to update. Actually, I want to change this to edit note, of course, and this should be note, which is an object, and then instead of saying here, we can say note.name, note.body, which means we can remove this, and instead of sending in this, we say this.note, so we just pass in the note we are on. And the note was updated, but we don't want to use a post request here, we want to use a patch, because then the backend knows that we want to update this. And the rest of this can just be like this. No, here I need to insert the note ID, this.note.id, and I need to change these to backticks so we can pass in variables in here. Great, so now I just need some functionality to get the note from the back end. So mounted this.getNote, async get note, and we made this functionality many times, so we can go into one of the other pages and copy the content here. So just copy the whole function from, for example, lead. Here we want to get the note ID from the parameter. It should be note_ID, notes, and note ID, and this.note equals the data we get from the server. Great, and that was the whole edit note page. So now we need to import this to the router. So edit note, pass it in there, scroll down, and we can copy this one. But instead of say add note here, I want to say edit note, and we need to pass in the note ID here. So here we get the client ID if we want that later, but we also get the note ID. Edit note and save. So then we can go back to client.vue, and then we want to add the edit button below this body. To do that, I can just make a copy of this one, replace it with edit note. Here I want to pass in the client ID, but also note ID colon note.id. Edit note. So now we have the button for editing. Great, we can try to edit this one. Okay, we didn't get information from the server. Got the 404 error. And that is probably because I didn't pass in the client ID. So we need to go back to edit note. And then here say client ID equals, and pass in client ID, and we can get it the same way here. Oops, const client ID equals this.route.params.id. So now we have information note 2 and the body of 2 changed, update, And the same problem is here now, that I didn't pass in the client ID to the update page. So I think if I just pass it in like that, copy the functionality to get the client ID, save. I think that's it, so it changed. Yes, now it was updated. Perfect. Okay, I need to fix this button because it looks kind of weird. Because this should use MT6, so margin top 6 instead. So we have a space above instead of below the button. Great. So then we have possibility to add, view and edit notes. So we can set this to done, this is done, and then this is done. And the next step now is to add an endpoint for getting information about the user. I want to just add this in the user profile, no, the team functionality here. So in serializer here, we're going to use this serializer. Because the first name and the last name is already fields on the user, you just haven't used them yet. So here in the views.py, to create a new function here. So at the top here, we can import the user serializer. And we also need to import a few things from the REST framework. From REST framework.views import API view. I want to create a custom view for this functionality. And we also need to get the response. We already have that there. And we need status. So here we can just append status together with view sets. Status. And then we can create below the team view sets. This will be a class. It fits here very well. Class user detail. And then we pass in API view there. The first function I want to create in here is a get object function, so we can very easily check if an object exists. So def get object self primary key try return user.objects.get pk equals pk, and we already imported the user at the top there. And if it doesn't exist, we can say accept user.does not exist raise http 404. That means we need to import this as well. It comes from Django, so from django.http import http 404, and this function here will be reused throughout this class. So now we want to create the get functionality, which is almost the same as the get query set up here. Def get, I need to pass in self, the request, the primary key, and format equals none. And then to get the user, we say user equals self.get object, pass in primary key. So here we use this function, and I just want to do this in case we want to edit another person which is not ourselves. The serializer we want to use is of course user serializer, and here we want to pass in the user, and then we can just say return response serializer.data. So this essentially does the same thing as this thing here, so we can get the user, but we don't get all of the other functionality. But there is a reason for that, and that is I just want to make this a little bit simpler, and it's also nice to know how to use this API view. So if you now just copy this, go to urls.py, we can import it here. Then we can pass it in at the top here, path. You can say teams as the first part in the URL, user or member. And here int pk, which is the user ID. Then we want to pass in user detail.s_view, make it a function, name user detail, and save. So now it should be possible to get information about a certain user from the front end. And then to check that that is working, we can go and create a new function here. Edit member.view. And since this is edit page, I can go to edit note, copy all of that, since much of it will be the same. Edit member. Here I want to make it possible to edit first name, user.firstname, and last name. Oh, sorry, copy this because it's supposed to be an input field. Last name, and then the update button. And here I want to rename this to edit member. This can be user. This.get user. Get user. And then the user ID should just be params.id like this. And then I want to pass in the user ID here. User ID teams/member, and then the user ID. This.user equals this. Great. And we want to use this here when we are updating it afterwards as well. Haven't created the backend functionality for this yet, but it's coming soon. Here we need to pass in the user ID, and we want to send the information from this.user to the backend. The user was updated, and then I want to send you back to team like this. Remove one of those. Perfect. Whoops, sorry. This should be members. No, sorry. Teams/member, and save. Just want to see that there are no errors. Perfect. So if I now go to team, where we list out the members, it should actually redirect you back to my account, because right now we just want to make it possible to edit your user. So if you now go back to my account, I can add a button here. First div class buttons, so we get a little bit space between these two buttons. And then the edit button, if I go back to, for example, lead, I just need to copy one of these named routes. I always forget the syntax for them. Like that. Edit user, pass in store.state.user.id, which is your user. Edit, and I want to indent this as well, and then we can close the div and save. So if I now go back to my account, I get the error here. Okay, I can't find edit user. No, of course not. I forgot to add it to the router. So first import it, edit user, pass it in there. If you now find edit, I can find the team actually. Edit member, and then pass in ID like that. Edit user, and refresh, can't resolve. Edit user. Okay, what did I call it? Edit member. Edit member. That's what it should be called all over the place actually. Save. Refresh. Still not working. No. Okay, go back to my account again. Replace it with edit member. Now we have the edit button there. Perfect. And I don't have a name for me yet, but I can try to change it. Code with Stein, update. And this will of course not work because we don't have anything in the backend to receive this data. So that's the next step now. We just need to go back to views.py, and in here we need to create the put functionality. Put is almost the same as patch. So self request pk format equals none, and then we get the user the same way as here, and also the serializer. But here we also want to pass in data equals request.data, which is the information we get from the front end. Now we can check if it's valid. If serializer.is valid, then we call serializer.save and return serializer. No, sorry, we're supposed to return this like that. And if it's not valid, we say return response serializer.errors and status equals status.http 400 bad request, because then there's something wrong. Okay, no errors, so we can just try to submit this again, but we got a new error, it's not allowed. Okay, there I made it work by going in here again and changing patch to put. So if I now go to edit, I get the code with Stein name, perfect. Now we can change information about the user. And in the next part of this series I want to show it here, for example, show the name instead of the username, and other places we use the full name of a user. Great. So if I now just go back here, I can set this to done. Oops. And this to done. And this to done. And that was it for this part. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions about anything in the code, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll answer as soon as I can. See you in the next video.